The birthday party was in full swing when Marcus arrived at the front door of what used to be his home. Through the large windows, he could see children laughing, colorful balloons swaying in the breeze, and his 8-year-old son Tommy blowing out candles on a superhero-themed cake. But when Marcus rang the doorbell, the laughter inside seemed to pause, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that made his heart sink. His ex-wife Sandra opened the door with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "It's Tommy's birthday," he said quietly, holding a carefully wrapped gift. "I thought I could—" "We discussed this," Sandra interrupted, her voice sharp that several parents inside turned to look. "The party is for family and close friends only." Behind Sandra, Marcus could see her new husband Derek adjusting his expensive watch, surrounded by other well-dressed parents who lived in this upscale neighborhood. Marcus looked down at his work clothes. He'd come straight from his construction job, still dusty and tired, but he hadn't wanted to miss his son's special day. "I'm his father," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you?" Derek stepped forward, his voice carrying across the room. "Because last I checked, fathers show up. They don't disappear for months and then expect to waltz back in." The party guests had gone completely quiet now, their children still playing, but the adults all watching this painful scene unfold. Marcus felt every judgmental stare, every whispered assumption about the divorced dad who couldn't even dress properly for his own son's party. "Daddy?" Tommy's small voice cut through the tension as he appeared beside Sandra. His face lit up when he saw Marcus. "You came!" But before Marcus could respond, Sandra gently but firmly guided Tommy back inside. "Say goodbye to your father, sweetie. He has to go." Marcus felt his world crumble as the door closed in his face, leaving him standing alone on the porch while the party continued without him. He didn't know that in exactly 24 hours, a knock on that same door would change everything forever. But to understand how that moment came to pass, we have to go back to where this story truly began. 3 years earlier, Marcus and Sandra had been the couple everyone envied, high school sweethearts who'd built a beautiful life together, complete with their miracle baby Tommy, born after years of struggling with infertility. Marcus had worked double shifts at the construction company, saving every penny to buy Sandra the house of her dreams in Maple Grove, the kind of neighborhood where children rode bikes safely and families barbecued on perfectly manicured lawns. But dreams, Marcus learned, could become nightmares faster than you could imagine. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Marcus was operating a crane when a cable snapped, sending a steel beam crashing down. He wasn't hurt badly, but the investigation revealed safety violations at the construction site. Marcus, as the operator, was held partially responsible. The lawsuit that followed drained their savings, and worse, left Marcus unable to work in construction for over a year while the legal proceedings dragged on. Sandra tried to be supportive at first, but watching their dream home go into foreclosure while Marcus struggled to find work that matched his previous income slowly poisoned their marriage. The whispered arguments late at night, the bills piling up, the stress of watching Tommy ask why Daddy seemed so sad all the time. It all became too much. "I married a provider," Sandra finally said during their last fight. "I married someone who could take care of his family. I don't know who you are anymore." The divorce was swift and brutal. Sandra got the house, which Derek, her new boyfriend who worked in finance, helped save from foreclosure. Marcus got weekend visitations and a mountain of debt that felt impossible to climb. But the real blow came 6 months later when Sandra announced she and Derek were getting married and she wanted to limit Marcus's time with Tommy. Her lawyer argued that Marcus was unstable, living in a tiny apartment, working odd jobs, unable to provide the kind of environment a child deserved. "It's not about keeping Tommy from his father," Sandra's lawyer had said in court. "It's about what's best for the child." Marcus couldn't afford a lawyer good enough to fight back. His court-appointed attorney barely looked up from his files during the hearing. Visitation was reduced to every other Sunday, and even then, Sandra found reasons to cancel. Tommy had homework. Tommy was sick. Tommy had a play date with his new friends whose parents, Sandra made clear, didn't think highly of Marcus showing up at school events in his work clothes. The months that followed were the darkest of Marcus's life. He took a job at Reynolds Construction, a smaller company that would hire him despite his legal troubles. The pay was barely enough to cover his apartment rent and child support, but Marcus worked with quiet determination. Every extra dollar went into a savings account he'd opened in Tommy's name. Every night, he called to say goodnight, even when Sandra made excuses for why Tommy couldn't come to the phone. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt like the world was against you. The weekend before Tommy's birthday, Marcus had saved enough money to buy his son the one thing he'd been talking about for months: a professional art set with oil paints, brushes, and a real easel. Tommy had inherited his grandmother's artistic talent, something Derek dismissed as impractical, but that made Marcus's chest swell with pride every time Tommy showed him a new drawing during their limited visits. Marcus had also been working on something else, something that Derek and Sandra didn't know about. For the past year, he'd been taking night classes, studying for his contractor's license. If he could become a licensed contractor, he could start his own business, maybe even bid on some of the larger projects around town. It meant 3 hours of sleep most nights, studying after 12-hour workdays, but Marcus was determined to rebuild his life brick by brick. The night before Tommy's birthday, Marcus sat in his small apartment, carefully wrapping the art set. He'd written a card that simply said, "For my amazing artist. Love, Dad." He'd planned to arrive early, maybe even help set up for the party like he used to do. Maybe Sandra would see that he was trying, that he wasn't the failure she'd made him out to be. Instead, he'd been publicly humiliated in front of an entire neighborhood. That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept replaying Tommy's disappointed face, the way the other parents had looked at him like he was some kind of intruder. Around 3 in the morning, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to fight back. Not with anger or accusations, but with something much more powerful. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. Instead of going to the construction site, he put on his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to court during the divorce, and drove to the family courthouse downtown. At the clerk's office, Marcus asked to speak with Judge Catherine Morrison, the same judge who had originally handled his custody case. Her assistant, Mrs. Chen, looked skeptical when this dusty construction worker asked for an emergency meeting. "Judge Morrison is very busy," Mrs. Chen said, barely glancing up from her computer. "You'll need to file the proper paperwork and wait for a court date like everyone else." "Please," Marcus said quietly. "It's about my son. And I think the judge would want to see what I have to show her." Something in his voice made Mrs. Chen look up. She studied Marcus's face, the quiet desperation, the way he held himself like a man who had nothing left to lose, and made a decision that would change everything. "Wait here," she said. 20 minutes later, Judge Morrison emerged from her chambers. Catherine Morrison had been a family court judge for 15 years, and she'd seen every kind of custody battle imaginable. She remembered Marcus's case, the construction worker who couldn't afford proper representation, whose ex-wife had painted him as irresponsible and unstable. "Mr. Torres," she said, "what can I do for you?" Marcus reached into a worn folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Your Honor, I've been taking night classes for the past year. I passed my contractor's licensing exam last week." He handed her the official certificate. "I also completed a parenting class, even though the court didn't require it. And I've been saving money for Tommy's college fund." Judge Morrison looked through the documents, her eyebrows rising slightly. Bank statements showing steady deposits. A letter from his night school instructor praising his dedication. Community service hours at a local youth center, teaching kids basic construction skills. Most impressive of all was a business plan for Torres Construction, complete with projected earnings and a list of potential clients who had already expressed interest in working with him. "This is very impressive, Mr. Torres," Judge Morrison said. "But why bring this to me now? Why not file a formal petition to modify custody?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Because yesterday was my son's birthday, and I wasn't allowed to celebrate with him. Because every time I try to be part of his life, I'm made to feel like I'm not good enough. And because I'm afraid that if I wait much longer, Tommy will start believing what everyone else is telling him about his father." Judge Morrison studied Marcus for a long moment. She'd been doing this job long enough to recognize genuine remorse and growth when she saw it. She also knew that some of her previous rulings, made with limited information and overworked schedules, sometimes needed correction. "Mr. Torres," she said finally, "I think it's time for an emergency custody review, and I think it needs to happen today." What happened next shocked everyone, especially Sandra and Derek. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, while Tommy was at school, there was a knock on the door of the Maple Grove house. Sandra opened it, expecting to see a delivery person, but instead found Judge Morrison standing on her porch, accompanied by a court bailiff and a social worker. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Morrison said, using Sandra's new married name, "I'm here to conduct an emergency welfare check and custody review. May we come in?" Sandra's face went pale. "I don't understand. Is there some kind of problem?" "That's what we're here to determine," the judge replied. Derek appeared behind Sandra, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Is this about Marcus? Because if he's making some kind of false accusations—" "Mr. Patterson," Judge Morrison interrupted, "this is about what's in the best interest of the child. Nothing more, nothing less." For the next hour, Judge Morrison conducted interviews and examined the home environment. She spoke with Sandra and Derek separately, asking detailed questions about Tommy's routine, his emotional well-being, and the reasons behind the limited contact with his biological father. When Derek suggested that Marcus was unstable and unreliable, Judge Morrison pulled out Marcus's recent documentation. "According to these records," she said, "Mr. Torres has maintained steady employment, completed additional education and parenting classes, and has never missed a child support payment, even when his income was significantly reduced. Can you explain to me what makes him unstable?" Derek stammered, unable to provide specific examples beyond Marcus's previous financial difficulties and his inappropriate appearance at social events. The social worker, meanwhile, was noting other things. The house was beautiful and well-maintained, but Tommy's room felt sterile, more like a showpiece than a child's sanctuary. Most telling were the family photos throughout the house. Dozens of pictures of Sandra, Derek, and Tommy, but not a single photograph of Tommy with his biological father. When Tommy arrived home from school, Judge Morrison observed his interactions with both Sandra and Derek. The boy was polite and well-behaved, but there was something subdued about him, a careful quality to his responses that suggested he'd learned to say what adults wanted to hear, rather than what he really felt. "Tommy," Judge Morrison said gently, "can you tell me about your birthday party yesterday?" Tommy glanced nervously at Sandra before answering. "It was really fun. We had cake and played games. Did you miss anyone being there?" Again, that glance toward Sandra. I wished my daddy could have come." "And why didn't he come?" Tommy looked confused. "Mommy said he was too busy with work." Judge Morrison made a note. She'd heard enough. Share in the comments if you think children should always have access to both parents, no matter what. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Morrison said, "I'm scheduling an emergency custody hearing for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Mr. Torres will be present, and I strongly suggest you both have legal representation." That evening, as Sandra frantically called lawyers and Derek paced around their living room complaining about the system, Marcus was having the first good night's sleep he'd had in months. For the first time in over a year, he felt hope. The next morning, the family courthouse was buzzing with unusual energy. Word had gotten out that Judge Morrison was personally handling an emergency custody modification, and several other lawyers had gathered to observe what promised to be an interesting case. Marcus arrived early, wearing his good suit and carrying a new folder of documents. He'd spent the evening organizing everything, not just his recent accomplishments, but also letters he'd written to Tommy over the past year that Sandra had never delivered, receipts for birthday and Christmas gifts that Tommy had never received, and a medical report showing that his back injury from the construction accident had fully healed. When Sandra and Derek arrived with their high-priced attorney, the contrast was stark. They looked like they were attending a board meeting, while Marcus looked like a man fighting for his life. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Morrison entered. The Honorable Catherine Morrison, presiding. Judge Morrison wasted no time. "We're here today because new information has come to light that suggests the current custody arrangement may not be in the best interest of the minor child, Thomas Marcus Torres." Sandra's lawyer immediately objected. "Your Honor, my client has provided a stable, financially secure home environment. Any changes to custody should follow proper legal procedures, not be decided in emergency hearings based on the complaints of a disgruntled ex-husband." "Counselor," Judge Morrison said sharply, "this hearing was initiated by the court based on my own observations and concerns. Mr. Torres didn't file any complaints. I sought him out after reviewing the case file and recognizing that my previous ruling may have been based on incomplete information." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Torres, please approach the bench and present your evidence." Marcus stood on shaking legs and walked forward. For the next 30 minutes, he presented his case not with anger or accusations, but with quiet documentation of his transformation over the past year. He showed his contractor's license, his completed parenting classes, his savings account for Tommy's education, and, most powerfully, a portfolio of letters and gifts intended for Tommy that Sandra had never allowed him to deliver. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, "I'm not asking to take Tommy away from his mother. I'm asking to be allowed to be his father. I've made mistakes and I've paid for them, but I've also worked every day to become the man my son deserves." When Sandra's lawyer cross-examined Marcus, trying to bring up his past financial troubles and the construction accident, Marcus answered each question with calm honesty. "Yes, I lost my job and our house," he said. "Yes, I went through a period where I couldn't provide the lifestyle my family was accustomed to. But I never stopped trying. I never stopped loving my son." And I never gave up on rebuilding my life so I could be the father he needs. The turning point came when Judge Morrison called Tommy into the courtroom. At 8 years old, he was old enough to express his preferences, though not old enough to make legal decisions. "Tommy," Judge Morrison said gently, "I want you to know that all the adults in this room love you very much. Sometimes adults make decisions they think are best for children, but we don't always ask children what they want. So I'm asking you now, what would make you happiest?" Tommy looked around the courtroom, his eyes finally landing on Marcus. "I want to see my daddy more," he said in a small voice. "I miss him, and I want him to come to my birthday parties." Sandra gasped softly, and Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Can you tell me more about that?" Judge Morrison asked. "Sometimes I draw pictures for my daddy, but Mommy says he's too busy to see them. And when my friends ask about my dad, I don't know what to say because I only see him sometimes." Tommy's voice grew stronger. "Derek is nice, but he's not my daddy. My daddy is the one who taught me how to draw buildings and who makes funny voices when he reads stories." Judge Morrison made several notes, then addressed the courtroom. "After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the current custody arrangement is not serving the best interests of the child. Effective immediately, custody will be modified to joint custody, with alternating weeks between both households. Mr. Torres will have equal parenting time, and both parents are ordered to facilitate the child's relationship with the other parent." The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "I'm ordering family counseling for all parties to help navigate this transition. And Mrs. Patterson, you are specifically ordered to deliver all future communications from Mr. Torres to his son, including gifts and letters." Sandra's lawyer immediately stood up. "Your Honor, we request time to appeal this decision." "Denied," Judge Morrison said firmly. "This is an emergency modification based on the child's welfare. Any appeals can be filed through proper channels, but this order takes effect today." As the gavel came down, Marcus felt tears stream down his face. For the first time in over a year, he would be picking up his son from school that very afternoon. But the real vindication came 3 hours later when there was a knock on Sandra's door in Maple Grove. This time, it wasn't Judge Morrison. It was Marcus holding Tommy's hand and carrying a large wrapped gift. "Hi, Sandra," Marcus said quietly. "Tommy wanted to show you the art set I got him for his birthday. He's been working on a picture all afternoon." Tommy ran to Sandra, clutching a drawing he'd made with his new paints. It was a picture of a house with 4 stick figures in front, a woman labeled Mom, a man labeled Derek, a smaller figure labeled Me, and another man labeled Dad. "Look, Mommy," Tommy said excitedly, "I drew our family, all of us." Sandra looked at the picture, then at Marcus, who was standing quietly in the doorway. For the first time since their divorce, she really saw him, not as the failure she'd convinced herself he was, but as the man who had loved her enough to work double shifts for their dream house, who had never stopped fighting to be part of his son's life, and who had transformed his pain into purpose. "Marcus," she said softly, "would you like to come in? I think we have a lot to talk about." The neighbors who had whispered about the divorced dad who couldn't even dress properly for his son's birthday party had a different story to tell now. They watched Marcus help Tommy set up an easel in the backyard, teaching him how to mix colors and make shadows. They saw a father and son who laughed together, who created together, and who clearly adored each other. 6 months later, Marcus's construction company had landed 3 major contracts, including one to build a new community center in Maple Grove. The same neighbors who had once looked down on him now hired him to renovate their kitchens and build their decks. Success, Marcus learned, looked different from the outside than it felt on the inside. But having Tommy's proud smile when he picked him up from school every other Friday, that was worth more than any contract. The real victory, though, came on Tommy's 9th birthday. This time, when Marcus arrived at the party, Sandra opened the door with a genuine smile. "Right on time," she said. "Tommy's been waiting for you to help him blow out the candles." As Marcus walked into the backyard, Tommy ran up and grabbed his hand. "Daddy, look! I used the paints you got me to make decorations for my own party." Hand-painted banners fluttered in the breeze, each one a small masterpiece created by a boy who had learned that love doesn't come from perfection, but from never giving up on the people who matter most. Would you have fought as hard as Marcus did for your children? Tell us in the comments. The party guests, some of the same people who had witnessed Marcus's humiliation a year earlier, watched as he helped Tommy cut the cake, as he cheered louder than anyone when Tommy opened his gifts, and as he organized games that had all the children laughing and running around the yard. Derek, who had initially resented Marcus's return to Tommy's life, found himself admitting that the boy was happier, more confident, and more secure knowing that both his parents loved him unconditionally. As the sun set and the party wound down, Marcus was packing up Tommy's new art supplies when Judge Morrison appeared at the backyard gate. She was off duty, wearing casual clothes, but several parents recognized her immediately. "I hope you don't mind," she said to Sandra and Marcus, "but I was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how things were going." Tommy immediately ran up to her. "Judge Morrison, look at my painting." He showed her a watercolor of a construction site, complete with cranes and workers in hard hats. In the corner, a small figure in a yellow hard hat was labeled, "My Dad." Judge Morrison studied the painting, then looked at Marcus. "It seems like things are going well." "Better than I ever imagined," Marcus replied. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't show you in court before, for giving me the chance to prove I could be the father Tommy deserves." Judge Morrison smiled. "Mr. Torres, you proved that to yourself. I just made sure the law caught up with what was already true." As she prepared to leave, Judge Morrison turned back to the small crowd of parents who had gathered to listen. "Family," she said, "isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, especially when it's hard. It's about growing, forgiving, and never giving up on love." 3 years have passed since that first birthday party disaster, and Marcus's life looks completely different now. Torres Construction has grown into one of the most respected firms in the county. Marcus owns a house just 10 minutes from Sandra and Derek, close enough that Tommy can bike between both homes. The refrigerator in Marcus's kitchen is covered with Tommy's artwork, and Tommy's room there is filled with easels, paints, and half-finished masterpieces. But the real change is in the relationships. Sandra and Marcus aren't friends exactly, but they're partners in raising their son. Derek has become an unexpected ally, even helping Marcus navigate some of the business challenges of running his own company. And Tommy, now 11, is a confident, artistic kid who knows without question that he is loved by everyone in his complicated but beautiful family. Last month, Tommy entered a citywide art contest with a painting called My Family Tree. Instead of a traditional tree, he painted a construction crane with different colored hard hats hanging from each branch, one for each person who had helped build his life. He won first place. At the awards ceremony, held in the same courthouse where Judge Morrison had changed their lives, Tommy dedicated his victory to "My dad, who taught me that sometimes you have to build something twice to make it strong." Marcus, sitting in the audience between Sandra and Derek, wiped tears from his eyes as Tommy held up his trophy. Looking around the room, he saw Judge Morrison in the back row, smiling and applauding along with everyone else. After the ceremony, as families gathered outside the courthouse, a reporter from the local newspaper approached Marcus. "Mr. Torres," she said, "your story has become quite well known around town. The father who fought for his custody rights and built a successful business in the process. What would you say to other parents going through similar struggles? Marcus looked at Tommy, who was showing his trophy to a group of his school friends, both from his mom's neighborhood and his dad's. "I'd say that being a parent isn't about being perfect," Marcus replied. "It's about being present. It's about showing up, even when people think you don't belong. It's about working every day to become worthy of the love your children already give you." The reporter scribbled notes, then asked, "Any regrets about the difficult years?" Marcus thought for a moment, watching as Sandra and Derek joined the group of kids, both of them beaming with pride at Tommy's achievement. "Every struggle taught me something I needed to know," he said finally. "Every closed door led me to work harder to find an open one. Every time someone said I wasn't good enough, it reminded me that I had more growing to do. I wouldn't change anything because all of it led to this moment." As families began to disperse, Tommy ran back to Marcus and grabbed his hand. "Dad," he said, "next year I want to enter a painting of your construction site. Will you take me to work with you sometime so I can see how you build things?" "Every Saturday," Marcus promised, "and maybe you can help me design some of the projects. Torres Construction could use a good artist." Tommy grinned. "Torres and Son Construction?" Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the courthouse steps. "I like the sound of that." As they walked toward the parking lot, Sandra fell into step beside them. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology for the birthday party 3 years ago, for a lot of things." Marcus shook his head. "We both did what we thought was right at the time. What matters is where we are now." Sandra smiled, then looked down at Tommy, who was still clutching his art trophy. "Where we are now is pretty good." That night, as Marcus tucked Tommy into bed at his house, Tommy asked the question that had been on his mind all evening. "Dad, what made you keep trying when everyone said you should give up?" Marcus sat on the edge of Tommy's bed, looking around the room filled with artwork and trophies and evidence of a childhood filled with love. "Because," he said, "giving up would have missing out on moments like tonight, missing out on watching you grow into the amazing person you're becoming, missing out on being your dad." Tommy nodded solemnly, then smiled. "I'm glad you didn't give up." "Me too, buddy. Me too." As Marcus turned off the lights and headed to his own room, he stopped by the window that looked out toward the house where Sandra, Derek, and Tommy spent the other half of his time. In the distance, he could see the lights still on in what he knew was Tommy's room there. Probably working on another painting or reading another book. 3 years ago, Marcus had stood outside that house as an unwelcome intruder, humiliated and defeated. Tonight, he was part of a family structure that might not look traditional, but was built on something stronger than convention. It was built on love that refused to quit, forgiveness that chose growth over resentment, and the unwavering belief that children deserve to be surrounded by all the adults who love them. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that have to be rebuilt from the ground up, constructed with the careful attention of people who understand that second chances are precious gifts that should never be wasted. And sometimes the man they call just a construction worker is actually an architect of hope, building bridges where others saw only walls, creating foundations strong enough to support a love that spans multiple homes, different last names, and the complex but beautiful reality of a modern family that chooses to work. Family, Marcus had learned, isn't just about blood or marriage certificates or living under the same roof. Family is about showing up. Family is about fighting for each other. Family is about never giving up on love, even when love looks different than what you originally planned. Tonight, as Marcus drifted off to sleep, he smiled thinking about tomorrow. Another day of building. Construction sites in the morning, homework help in the afternoon, and bedtime stories for a boy who knew, without any doubt, that his daddy would always be there. The best construction project Marcus ever completed wasn't a building or a bridge or a community center. It was rebuilding his relationship with his son, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of showing up when it mattered most. And that project, Marcus knew, would last forever. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so powerful you'll never forget it.